the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, take the roll.
Mayor O'Connor.
Here.
Morissette. Here. Wakefield. Here. Knutson. Here. Kennedy.
Here.
Brooke. Here. Hall.
Here.
Before we get into the agenda, I did want to note tonight the passing of a longtime city employee, Jim Fry. Tremendous asset to our community. He worked for the city for 43 years. He was with Public Utilities. He was our fire chief for about 20 years and served on our fire department for decades. Tremendous public servant, dedicated to his family, dedicated to our city, and he will be sadly missed, sorely missed by everybody here. It's unfortunate. He was still pretty young and just retired about a year into retirement, and it's like I say, it's just a tremendous loss to us all. So to his family and friends, we send along our greatest sympathies and admiration for all the work that he did here. All right, comments and suggestions from citizens present. This is your opportunity to talk tonight about any item that is not on our agenda that is relative to the city. If you have a comment, please come to the podium, identify yourself and your address, keep your comments brief, try not to repeat other people's comments. Does anybody have a comment? Any comment? Any comment? Any comment? Hearing none, we'll close that portion of the agenda. We have presentations, the 2023 financial report presentation.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name is David Minch. I'm one of the government audit shareholders at Kerber Rose. And tonight we're going to go through at a high level the financial highlights for the financial statement audit for the year ended December 31st, 2023. I'm assuming that either you have the hard copy or the electronic copy in front of you, so I'll refer to both page numbers as we work through the financial statements. But first and foremost, I just wanted to say a round of thank you to, I know Allison is not with the city anymore, but Allison did do a lot of work in preparation for this audit, and we were able to get this audit issued prior to her departure. But not only was it Allison, but also the whole financial team at the city. They worked very hard to prepare for this audit. The audit involves a lot of one-time transactions, and the team worked very hard to get this accomplished in a very quick turnaround from our standpoint. So everything went well, and I know it'll go well in the future with whoever is in that leadership role in the future. And just know that if anything comes up, Kerber Rose is dedicated to our clients, and we're always here to help. So whether it's anybody in this room or anybody on the team, feel free to reach out to us with any questions, concerns, thoughts, or comments. So with that, we're going to start with the annual financial report. That is the larger of the two documents that we'll be looking at today. And the first page that we're going to look at is printed page number 1, or PDF page number 5. This is the independent auditor's report on the annual financial report. Essentially, this is why the city has an audit done, and that is to receive an opinion on your financial statements. The second paragraph on this page states that in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the business type activities, and the discretely presented component units for each major fund for the year ended December 31st, 2023. So in other words, this is a clean or unmodified opinion. This is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as an auditor on a municipality's financial statements. So everything in this, in short term, everything in this annual financial report is presented fairly and materially correct from our standpoint. The next page we're going to look at is printed page number 7, or PDF page number 12. This is the balance sheet for all of the city's governmental funds. A couple things I wanted to highlight here. The first one being that the general fund ended the year with a total fund balance of roughly 5.3, almost 5.4 million. The largest component of this is the unassigned fund balance, which was just over 4.7 million. And the unassigned fund balance is really the accumulated reserve for the city to cash flow the operations of the city. And oftentimes, as auditors, we get asked, how is this comparatively speaking to other municipalities? You know, is this a good range to be in? And I can assure you that every single municipality in Wisconsin that we work with, and we work with over 150 different towns, villages, cities, and counties within the state, operates differently, even though, you know, a lot of them are the same in many respects. But, you know, when we gauge the health of the general fund, typically I like to see, just from past experience, you know, a range of anywhere from 25 to 40%. And that's largely based on just the operations of each municipality. And what I'm saying when we look at a percentage, it's the total general fund unassigned fund balance compared to the total expenditures within the general fund. So if we take that 4.7 million divided by roughly 11.7 million in expenditures in the general fund, that gets us right at 40%, which to me is an indication that the general fund is performing very well. We've got some significant cash reserves built up in that general fund to cash flow the operations of the city. I did want to note that this is a decrease within the general fund overall of about $427,000 this year. And when I was talking to Allison when we were on site doing our field work, a lot of this is really due to timing. There were some expenditures that were budgeted for in the prior year that just simply fell in this year, whether it was due to supplier constraints or just timing of when the projects could get completed. But the largest two components when we look at the budget to actual statement later on in the review of the annual financial report here, the largest two components were really the overage within the police budget. And I know based on discussion, a lot of that was overtime built in to the budget. And then also the work that was done on the municipal buildings this year. So there was some money paid to do some renovations, and some of that was timing based on insurance claims and things like that in the past. But I did want to provide some context regarding that change. The next item that I wanted to point out on this page is that the city, as of December 31st, had about $702,000 in unspent ARPA funds. And based on my discussion with Allison, and I know she indicated that she, you know, made the board or the council well aware of this, that those funds need to be committed by December 31st, 2024, and then fully expended by December 31st, 2026. And I know looking at your agenda for this meeting and also just sitting in on the finance committee, it sounds like there's plans in place to fully expend that money, but we just wanted to do our due diligence and make you aware of that requirement. The last thing I wanted to comment on this page is the total fund balance for the year. All of the governmental funds of the city ended the year with about 18.3 million in total fund balance for the year, and this is up significantly, almost $4 million this year, which is largely due to the increase in the capital projects fund, which was largely driven by bond proceeds, you know, that were received this year, debt that was incurred this year for capital projects. I believe it was for the Public Works facility, if I'm remembering correctly. You know, the money was taken out and the project just didn't incur. So I would expect that total fund balance would come back down in the current year as those expenditures are being incurred. The next page we'll look at is PDF page number 14 or printed page number 9. This is the statements of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund balance for the governmental funds. Most of what I wanted to cover I already illustrated on the previous page, but the general fund did decrease approximately $427,000 this year. On this page, towards the end, towards the bottom of this page, where you look at the net change in fund balance line, you can see that substantial increase in the capital project fund. And the main driver of that change are the proceeds from the long-term debt that was incurred. But the other item that I did want to just highlight is the increase in fund balance or increase in deficit that TID number 6 has had. There's been, I know, based on discussions with Allison, there's been substantial development within TID district number 6, and that fund did increase its deficit approximately $584,000 this year. So lots of things going on in that TID, very positive things. The fact that that TID is in a deficit fund balance is not anything to be concerned about. I used to live up in that area, and coming back to Hudson, about twice a year, I can see all the development that's going on, and I know right where this TID district is. So there's a lot of very positive things there that I think that TID will perform very well, and you'll see a very good increase in that increment that is generated within that TID. So just to reiterate, lots of positive things from the governmental fund side of things, even with that decrease in the general fund. Just very positive things and a very strong financial outlook for the governmental funds. Next page we'll look at is printed page number 11 or PDF page number 16. This is the statement of net position or the balance sheet for the proprietary funds, or as you might refer to them as your utility funds. The water utility ended the year with a total net position of about 35.9, almost $36 million in total net position. The sewer utility ended at about 14.6 million, and the parking utility ended at about 1.5 million dollars this year. When we look at utility funds, I think it paints a clearer picture is painted when you look at the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund balance, or the income statement for those utilities. By GASB definition, an enterprise or a proprietary fund is really set to operate like a self-sustaining business. And so that's why we see the water and the sewer and also the parking utilities here. So on printed page number 12, PDF page number 17, this is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position. And I just wanted to highlight here, the utilities had a very positive year from my perspective. I know there's a lot of changing dynamics with the water and the sewer as it relates to the village of North Hudson, and there's some significant changes coming down the pipeline. But overall, these utilities both had a very strong operating year, and that is evident when you look about halfway down this page. You can see the operating income, and the water utility generated about 1.1 million in operating income, and the sewer utility generated just over $123,000. Some of this is offset or enhanced by non-operating revenues, expenses, and also some capital contributions. And so typically when you have a very active TID and even development in your area, we see a lot of developer contributions where the infrastructure is put in the ground and then it's contributed back to the municipality to manage. It's a very common practice. There was some significant activity there, and so the net change in total net position was about 1.7 million for the water utility and just over $1 million for the sewer utilities. So again, just to emphasize, these are very positive aspects for the utility and also the city as a whole. The next page that I wanted to highlight on was printed page number 36 or PDF page number 41. I always like to point out, where kind of each municipality falls from a debt standpoint. And in Wisconsin, any municipality can incur up to 5% of the equalized value set forth by the Department of Revenue. And that would allow the city to incur up to 157 million in general obligation outstanding debt. At December 31st, the net outstanding general obligation debt was only 31.8 million. So you're 126 million under your total allowable general obligation debt limit. So, from a debt standpoint, pretty low, generally speaking here, which again is a very positive aspect for the city, and it can incur debt as it sees fit based on its capital needs and development within the municipality. The last page that I wanted to highlight in the annual financial report is printed page number 59 and PDF page number 65. This is the condensed budget to actual statement for the general fund. To me, this, and then also there's a more detailed budget to actual statement presented later on in this report. But this really allows, us to see the picture as far as what we anticipated to happen and what actually happened. As I mentioned, there was a decrease. We did have a balanced budget passed where we didn't anticipate an increase or a decrease. But based on discussions with Allison and knowing what went on last year, the most significant portion of that is related to just some timing of when expenditures and revenues were incurred or came in. But the largest component of that is related to the public safety expenditures and the police overtime essentially being over budget and the police salaries. So those are things I know that the council's aware of and had discussions about. So again, just adding some context to the picture that is presented on this page. Does anyone have any questions on the annual financial report before we look at the management letter?
Anybody? Nope, no questions right now.
Okay, sounds good. So this next document that we're going to cover is the management communication letter, and this is a standard communication that gets issued at the conclusion of all of our audits. For the most part, it is just an overview of how our audit went, and it discloses basically a recap of what was disclosed in our engagement letter, and also brings to the attention those charged with governance anything that we feel is pertinent to convey to you. And the one thing that I just wanted to highlight is on page number 4, both printed page number 4 and PDF page number 4. This is our internal control report that is housed within this communication letter. As auditors, we're not required to audit your internal controls, but we're required to take them into account while we're planning and performing our audit. And anytime we identify a weakness, we're required to evaluate it to see if it meets the definition of a material weakness, a significant deficiency, or simply another matter. And we do have 2 findings that are consistent with the past. We've been the auditor for this is our 2nd year, but I did look back, and this, is for the past 5+ years that have been presented to the city. But we do have 2 findings that we consider to be a material weakness. The first one is material account adjustments. Essentially the city has an audit done to make sure that these financial statements can be prepared and reported in accordance with GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, but also in accordance with the Department of Revenue and the Public Service Commission within the state. So we assist the city with various depreciation entries. There's a lot of GASB entries related to the OPEB standards, and also that is the other post-employment benefit standards, and also the WRS pension liability. So we assist the city with preparing those entries, and because those entries are material, you're simply receiving this financial statement finding. This is a finding that I would say 75 to 85% of the municipalities that we work with in the state of Wisconsin receive. As I said, kudos to everybody on the finance team. They did a great job preparing for the audit and helping us through it. There's just certain things that, we help the city with, and because they're material, you're receiving this finding. And those entries were presented to Allison as part, and Mike as part of the draft financial statements, which they approved and signed the rep letter. So everything should be accounted for and taken care of in that regard. The second finding is the financial reporting finding. And standards changed a number of years ago, about 10 years ago. I was still actually working up in the Twin Cities at the time, that simply stated that you as management of the organization are responsible for preparation of the annual financial report. And if you cannot prepare this document in entirety, you're required to contract with a third party to assist in the preparation of this, or with your auditor, and you receive this finding. And again, this is a finding I would say that 95% of municipalities, if not even slightly more, that we work with in the state of Wisconsin receive, simply due to a cost benefit standpoint. And so I like to tell everybody, on this call, that this is simply a reminder that, we assisted with the preparation of this, but ultimately you're responsible for the fair presentation. And, we post journal entries to assist to make sure that we're in compliance with GAAP. And that, management of the organization, whether, it was Allison and Michael, both of them actually, that, agreed to what we presented and signed off and took responsibility for this. The only other matter that I just wanted to highlight today, this is just part of our observation as part of an audit, is that the city's current capitalization standpoint for recognizing capital assets is currently $1,000. One thing that we recommend is really bringing that up to $5,000. And the reason being is that, it's less work for the employees of the city to recognize every capital asset that is, over $1,000. You'd only have to recognize it at $5,000 at that point. And so this is a common finding, and we worked through a lot of municipalities in the state to increase this threshold. It used to be $500 or $1,000 simply because we could track this, provide that to our insurance agency, and they'd have a good handle on what we have. So much of insurance these days are based on assessed values, and then there's a proportionate component that's based on, your assets within a building or anything like that. So again, just a recommendation, something I'd be happy to discuss further with anybody if you have any questions, but this is just one thing that a lot of municipalities have migrated to in the past 5 to 10 years.
Okay, thanks, David. Anybody? Comments, questions? Oh, great job, David.
All right. Well, thank you very much. As always, as the city works through a transition, always feel free to reach out to me. I know Brent and I are connecting later on this week to establish a connection, but to anybody on this call, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help through anything.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right, next on the agenda is the Hudson Area Backpack and Food Program. Chris Knott was going to be making a presentation on their behalf this evening, but she's not feeling well, so we'll have to do that another time. Public hearing on ordinance 11-23 to rewrite chapter 255-17.1 through 255-17.10 in the City of Hudson zoning code. This is a public hearing. It is your opportunity to comment on this subject if you'd like. If you do have a comment, please come up to the podium, identify yourself and your address, make your comments, try to keep your comments brief, try not to repeat others' comments. And it's a public hearing, so we do we have Zoom up on this, or no? Okay. So it's just anybody here. All right. So once again, it's a public hearing. Does anybody have a comment? Any comment? Any comment? Any comment? Hearing none.
Move to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
You have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Public hearing is closed. Ordinance 11-23 to rewrite Chapter 255-17.1 through 255-17.10 in the City of Hudson's zoning code.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Josh is here with Cedar Corp, our consultant, helping us work through our overall zoning code update. One point of clarification when we get started, this has actually only gone through one reading.
Yep.
So this isn't the third. I know obviously in the past we've suspended and we've had conversations about suspension of the rules and things like that. But this would technically be the second reading. Obviously, since the last conversation we had in March, we've since had a meeting with downtown business owners and property owners in the overlay to provide them with an opportunity to share their thoughts and concerns or opinions on the draft. Josh, you can probably convey some more of what those comments were, as well as our response to those comments, as opposed to the previous ordinance that we looked at. And I think there'll probably be some further discussion too. So, Josh?
Sounds good. We've got a brief PowerPoint. It's covering a lot of the same things that we've gone over in the past. Again, my name is Josh Miller, Senior Planner with Cedar Corporation. The whole intent of the Downtown Overlay District is we're modifying it a little bit from a more prescriptive code to a more subjective code, giving a little bit more opportunities for different things to be approved. We still want to focus on strong pedestrian connections, preserving and restoring historic buildings, minimizing the adverse impacts of new development and redevelopment, improving economic viability. And then this is from the NR 118 portion, retaining the riverfront management characteristics of NR 118. Again, this applies strictly to the downtown area, and there's a downtown overlay is shown in the map in the presentation. The ordinance only applies to new construction, restoration, replacement, expansions, or modifications. It does include franchise and national changes, but interior projects are exempt from this requirement. So you can remodel the interior, and not going to be held to these standards.
Which is the same as it is or has
Currently.
been currently.
Yep. And so we've touched on a lot of the things, the procedures, the information, but tonight I wanted to focus on really what we discussed on the May 2nd meeting. So in April, we were here talking about this, and there was a few comments about from the downtown business owners, a representative that asked for additional review and additional time to review it with some of the downtown business owners. So on May 2nd, I think invitations were sent out to the business owners in the downtown. We did have 10 people show up to that, plus 3 alderpersons. We had a really good discussion. It was positive. There were some questions brought up. There were some concerns brought up. And I think we addressed them in a very fair way and in a good way. So the big concern really was the context and scale. And they said, well, if you're going to do a redevelopment plan, and let's say there's a less than desirable building next door to me, the previous iteration of that was saying, well, you have to match your surrounding buildings. And so if you have a 1-story building and then the other building to the other side of you is a 2 or 3-story building, how do you determine what to go with? And are you really going to require us trying to match a less, maybe a blighted building? And I thought that was a good question. It was a very fair question. And so a lot of it stemmed from the illustration that we had in the packet, and I can kind of go to that right now. That was this one. And in an interior lot, this drawing kind of makes sense. Okay, you got a standard downtown block that is a desirable block that you want to kind of match that. And if you have a redevelopment project in the middle of that block, it makes sense. You're going to want to have a similar scale and a similar context with that new project to the surrounding buildings. But let's say it's on the outskirts or is not, right next to other buildings that are 2 or 3 stories. The look that you want, what do you go with? You go with other buildings that are not meeting that. And so I think that what we ended up doing was removing those sections, the context and scale, as well as the balance and proportion. We got rid of that graphic because that could have been confusing for areas that were outside the interior blocks. And then instead of just focusing on the adjacent buildings, we said, the surrounding area should be taken into consideration, as well as the overall central business district. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, it wasn't just something that's next to you, that you were stuck with your neighbor and making sure it looked like your neighbor's building. So that was really the biggest concern. Once we got through that and talked about how we could address that, that seemed to kind of quell a lot of the concerns, at least that were brought up in that open house. And so, you know, we had some back and forth with working with Tiffany, and had some feedback on some red line changes, and so we added those to the draft ordinance, and basically removed those sections and provided some clarification as to what we're going to take into account when we look at the downtown area. So that was really the main changes from what we were presented to, or what we were presented in April, and I have that's pretty much about it. So we're really focusing on, you know, there's still the underlying zoning district that rules apply. I guess the other comment that was brought up is could some of the dimensional things just be strictly based on the overlay or the underlying zoning? So like in your conventional Euclidean zoning, you have, you know, front yard, side yard, rear yard setbacks, height limitations, and things like that. And in our overlay district, we have some things that require some undulation and some, you know, some changes to the facades and stuff that doesn't exactly isn't prescribed in the like central business district requirements. And after we dealt with the context and the scale and balance items, I think that kind of went away. But I think we didn't keep that comment, but I think we addressed it through their changes. So you still have the underlying zoning of the districts of the properties, and then the overlay district applies to the area that you see, that hatched area that you see in the map. NR 118, we did get a response from the DNR finally. The council did approve that already back in April. The DNR is yet to sign off, as that can happen sometimes, but they anticipate reviewing at the end of this month. Hopefully we have a final approval of that. So with that, certainly be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Well, I think one thing I want to be very clear to the public and the audience is that there was always a lot of concern about the expansion of the downtown district or potential for expansion of the downtown district. This does not include any type of expansion or ability for expansion outside of what the current code is. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be very clear and make that public statement, is that there is zero intent or direction for expansion of the downtown district as a whole. And I just think that's an important piece to note as well. So.
Okay. Anybody?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the extra meetings and for listening to business owners and residents. It's really appreciated, and certainly you did a great job of bringing in those recommendations that they had. A couple of spots in the ordinance, there's like at 255.17.6, which I believe is page 3 in our council packet.
Could
Letter
you say the numbers
L.
again?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooke, would you repeat those numbers? Thank you.
Absolutely. So it is 255.17.6, and it's on page, I believe, 13 of our packet. I believe that's what it is on mine anyways. And it's letter L. And there it's talking about the architectural design. And it talks about it meeting 50% of the listed areas. I'm wondering, in some places it's 50% of the standards or of the requirements. In other spots it's 60%. Just have heard from community members, where did that 50% come from? How come it's 50 in one spot and 60 in another spot? Can you just kind of walk us through it so we can have an understanding of that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good comment. Really, the 50% standard is because there's 8 categories, and there are 8 categories in that checklist. And so 50% of that is at least getting 4 of those items. 60% is not based on a separate checklist. It can be 60% of the facade or 60% of the linear feet. And so that's really we put in a number that is easily divisible by 8, and so we could have done 75%, which would have been 6 items of the 8 categories, but we just chose 50%. So it's just, at least you want to get at least 50%. Other than that, we wanted to be fair to the property owners and not over too onerous and saying you have to meet, 75% or more than 4 of those categories in case that their project has nothing to really do with any of those categories. There's some things, so the categories that I'm referring to are in the checklist, and I don't know if that was in your packet, but it's this design checklist that's going to be included that they'll have to fill out, and it includes historical styles, materials, and interpretations is one category, pedestrian positive experience, parking, creating spaces, and so on. So,
Perfect. Yep, and that's page 16 in the packet that,
Which is the same, for the most part, the same criteria that is already part of the overlay, right? It's just making it clearer and easier to understand.
it's breaking it up a little bit more into categories. So the current checklist is a laundry list of things, and it has it's not as grouped like that, and I don't recall exactly what the current standard is, but this one just kind of groups it together, and you have kind of a little more of an a la carte. You can pick and choose a little bit more, and you're required to at least meet the 50% standard.
Anybody else?
Just a comment, coming back to 101 and the first part of this whole conversation when it started is, so I own a building downtown and I can or can't do what I want with my building? Because these are the questions I've gathered from business owners. Is that true? How would you address that? Or have you? I read it, the appeals process, I
Yeah.
read it. And on the plan commission and been around for a little bit.
Yep.
How would you address that to a business owner?
That they're not allowed to do something.
Yeah, they get denied or something, or they want it this way and it doesn't go with our way, and
I mean, with zoning, you always have that. I mean, this is a little bit higher threshold and standard than what is typically applied to your conventional standard, because the city council and others have expressed a desire to have a higher threshold in the downtown. So there may be some cases in which they can't do exactly what they want, but there's opportunities to work with them to try to get them to a place where they can do something, but it may not be exactly in the way that or manner that they desire. So if there's something that and the 50% threshold allows them maybe some flexibility where if we required all the criteria, then there'd be definitely things that they couldn't do. But if they only have to meet 50%, then there might be some flexibility where, okay, we can compromise on some things. Generally, it's going to be working with the plan commission though in getting that addressed. So, but just like in a conditional use permit or just like in a rezoning, because there's zoning requirements, there's always going to be restrictions, and people may not be able to put up, let's say a 25-foot accessory structure, but they may still be able to put up an accessory structure. It just might have to meet the confines of the zoning. So I would say, yes, there's going to be restrictions, but in general, the city's going to work with the people to try to accommodate them and still meet the intent and the goals of the district.
thank you for that clarification.
Anybody else? All right, so do you want to suspend the rules?
We don't need
That's the
to.
council's pleasure. I mean, we did the first reading, would still be a second reading, and then we could approve.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to suspend on the second
Correct.
reading.
Yeah.
I did have a question about that, since the first reading was actually last fall, and this is named, 11-23?
The 11th ordinance in 2023.
Correct.
Right.
So is that appropriate to keep that naming on it, even though we don't do the final vote until,
It is from a tracking perspective so that we can track back to the original.
okay? So it's modified since then, but we can, and so the plan commission voted on the original proposal, but we okayed, we voted on the first reading last fall, but then we paused a little bit this spring for more input, which I do appreciate you doing the time to take that input, and appreciate our residents and property owners that came forward. So now we can do the second reading, even though it is slightly different, because they've made the modifications that were requested. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I moved we adopt ordinance 11-23.
I'll second.
got a motion and a second to adopt. Roll call?
Morissette,
Yes.
Wakefield. Yes. Knutson,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Brock,
yes.
Hall.
Yes.
Motion's approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks for all your work. Consent agenda.
Approve the meeting minutes from the June 3rd, 2024 regular council meeting. Approve claims in the amount of $529,015.57. Approve setting a public hearing on July 15th, 2024 regarding updates to the municipal code, section 255-90 and 255-91.
I'd like to have that pulled from the consent agenda.
Which one?
C, item C, if we could discuss it, please.
Approve a development plan expansion at 2221 Jack Ralt Drive, A&K Construction. Approve a certificate of compliance for interstate truck driving school at 1401 Gateway Circle, Bill Collins. Approve taxi license and taxi cab drivers. Approve fence easement agreement at 1219 Nemacogan Loop, April Duro. Approve Power Sentry camera for the boat launch. Allocate remaining ARPA funds to street maintenance and traffic safety projects. And approve the purchase of a splash pad for Wet Camp Park in the amount of $374,659.75 from MWP Recreation.
Move to approve?
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item C. Roll call.
Morissette.
Yes.
Wakefield.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes,
Kennedy.
Yes.
Bruck.
Yes.
Hall.
Yes.
All right, consent agenda is approved. Item C.
thank you. My point on this item, and I'm always open to being schooled, so to speak, on how things flow to go back and forth from the Plan Commission, but I do understand that proposed changes to the code, a municipal code that affects zoning, does have to be approved by the Plan Commission. So I don't object to that concept that we're having a public hearing and that they also will probably have input on it. But since the main item for new business tonight is the changes that I'm recommending coming forward, I would prefer that we wait, have our discussion, decide what modifications we might make to that code 255-90 and -91, and then we can go back and vote to say, let's have our hearing.
To hold them kind of at the same time, so it's everything.
Well, I would like, because, in the attachment to the issue sheet was a draft document that did not include all the recommendations I
Right.
was suggesting.
Right.
So I would prefer that we hold off on this consent item, but at the end of our discussion, whatever the council agrees on with new business, if we do come to a conclusion tonight, then we'll have that voted on, that would be presented. Does
So
that
you
make
want-
sense?
Sure, you just want to put this on the agenda after.
Yes, can we vote at the end of our new business discussion to have a public hearing?
Any objection to that?
None.
Oh, okay, we'll do that.
Thank you. I just think it'll be more complete to have that discussion.
Perfect, okay. All right, possible ordinance amendments to sections 14-4, Board of Appeals, section 255-90, creation, organization, powers and duties, and 255-91 variances.
Oh, in March, sorry, I gotta get to the right page. Councilmember Knutson brought forward some proposed changes that impacted the Board of Appeals. I know that those proposed changes were well-received by staff as well, obviously as a city attorney, and council member, you can obviously add to what I'm saying, but I think there's a couple of main thrusts to some of these proposed changes, which include what we just talked about in the consent agenda, in terms of making sure that our language in terms of quorum is a simple majority to match state statute. Concerns and clarifying ex parte communication understanding that our Board of Appeals is quasi judicial. So it is more of a court-like setting. It is like a court-like setting, and they wield a lot of power. And these individuals are volunteers, and we thank them obviously for their service that they provide to the community. It's a difficult job, especially when you have big issues that come before them. Not overly frequently, but it happens. These proposed amendments, while there is policy discussion that you can see in your packet in terms of, what the council may want to discuss or deliberate on, it does a good job of protecting them, I think, in a lot of ways, in terms of, okay, this is our charge, these are the rules and the bumpers that we have to operate within. So there is also the requirement for mandatory training. UW-Stevens Point offers a pretty comprehensive training series for not only Board of Appeals members, but also Planning Commission members. So that's also included, as well as, like I said, the ex parte communication, whereas, any type of communication that, ultimately, probably shouldn't occur. But if it does, or if by chance an applicant were to come forward and communicate with one of our Board of Appeal members, that the Board of Appeal member would have to state that encounter occurred, and then could, obviously then recuse themselves from voting, or should at that point. And then I think ultimately there's another recommendation in there to have separate legal counsel outside of the city attorney, which in some ways makes sense. There's going to be some cross-pollination if there's code review or things like that has to occur where, it's a city item that our city attorney would be involved in. But ultimately, if there's a scenario where the council has an issue with a decision that the Board of Appeals made, our only way to address that potentially would be taking the Board of Appeals to court, which is obviously something that we don't want to have to do here as a council. But it's good to have some of those, at least in my opinion, some of those, a little bit of a separation there. Did I touch on the majority?
I think you did quite a few.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that overview. I wanted to talk about a few points.
Sure.
If we can, but yeah, please.
Yeah, no, that's what I had.
Your
That's
expertise.
basically, I would say the broad overview of it. And obviously, the city attorney has reviewed this as well. And, there's some policy considerations that the council may want to weigh in on. But ultimately, staff is supportive of these recommended changes that the alderperson brought forward.
Thank you for that explanation, and I'm certainly learning. I don't claim to be an expert on the Board of Zoning Appeals, but I have watched the online training. You don't have to travel to Stevens Point to get this knowledge that's available. They have live webinars, and then it's a recorded video as well. It's open to the public to see. So that's a way that I've helped learn it, and talking to people who've served on the Board of Appeals in the past too. People have approached me about concerns and questions. And so I did kind of highlight some points, whether that needs to be included in the ordinance or not. They're numbered 1 to 10 there. Of some, just to show on our issue sheet today, page 228 on today's agenda. Again, as you itemized some of the points that I thought were important. And I will have to say, our city attorney brought forward several issues that he's come across in assisting the Board of Appeals involving the quorum, how many people need to be present, et cetera, for a vote. So that sort of is the basis, if I'm not wrong, of what was that draft copy.
Correct.
In the consent agenda. So I don't believe, Mr. Irving can comment if we've omitted anything that he wanted in, but my intent was just to expand on it a little bit, partly so the public can learn about it and see. It'll be in our municipal code, but also just to, again, I want to provide support and training. This is, as you mentioned, a very difficult job. It's a quasi-judicial. The decisions that are made by this board cannot be overruled by us as elected officials. That's why any concern about the decisions they make go to circuit court, because they do act in a quasi-judicial. And again, there's a lot of weight that goes with that. And I just want them to feel supported and know their boundaries and how to make their decisions. I was reading some materials just today, I think it was from the League of Municipalities, that you said, summary, the default position for the Board of Appeals is no. No, thank you. In other words, these are our zoning guidelines. They're there for a reason. They've been developed over many years. you're coming to ask for permission to do something different from what we have in our zoning code. And so, you have to sort of start from, no, you can't, and then there's very defined parameters of how the applicant can prove that they have an unnecessary hardship and other things that are more detailed. So that is, again, it's, my goal would be that those folks that are willing to serve feel well prepared and understand their role. So again, some itemized things. So let's just look at the bottom, and thank you for the highlighted comments from our city attorney, Mr. Vivian. I do want to ask you, so I had broken this up into there changes needed to be made just because chapter 14-4 gives the broad overview of what the Board of Appeals is. That's the chapter in our code that lists all our committees. Park Board, Plan Commission, they're all listed there. So Board of Appeals is listed there, so I did want to make sure we made a change there. So one of the first comments that Mr. Vivian made was regarding the alternate members. So that was comment NV1. And Mr. Vivian stated that this is not a requirement that there are 2 alternate members. I just wanted to get your insight on that. What was your interpretation of that?
Yeah, it's not a statutory requirement, but certainly the council has the authority.
Okay, sure. Well, I differ with you on that.
Or perhaps there is a statutory requirement that you're going to pass out right now.
It's highlighted. It is actually in the statute, and I think that was your goal initially,
Yep.
to say, let's have our ordinance meet, so you can just pass those around.
Correct.
It's highlighted there. The mayor, so this is in Wisconsin statute 62.23, defining the Board of Appeals. These are the roles of cities. And so we're 62.23, sub 7, sub E, sub 2, and down. I've highlighted it here. It's underlined for you. The mayor shall appoint for staggered terms of 3 years 2 alternate members of such board in addition to the 5 members provided for above. So we do, in fact.
So I stand corrected on that.
There you go.
point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do think that one should stand. And I think that item is also pointed out. So that's the first page, 228, the
And
bottom
speaking in
there.
a practical matter,
Yeah.
it's hard to get,
So, yeah. Now, what is the mayor's liability for not appointing somebody for lack of having applicants to appoint? I mean, it says shall. I mean, what am I supposed to do?
I know that is a strong directive. Is there a different word you'd be more comfortable with? Should?
Shall is
appoint?
more than a strong directive.
What's in the state
Well,
statutes?
if it's,
Into any other than shall.
Right. It's true, the statute.
Well, and you have to make, obviously you have to make an effort, but it's based on people who apply to serve as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a,
In other words, you're not under house arrest or something if you don't get someone. I know that you have had difficulty, or any position in we have many boards where we need citizen involvement. And unfortunately, it's hard for you for always to come up with people who are willing to serve. So I do think we need to adopt it, though, because it's the state statute.
Okay.
We have had 2 alternates recently, but I know you've had some openings, so the alternates have moved in
Yeah.
to the, and I think,
And we posted too, haven't we, Mike?
sure.
and we will continue to. It's to that point, getting people to, especially on this one, it's not the most attractive committee oftentimes.
Well, and-
It can be hard, it's a hard
It can be
committee.
hard.
It is hard board.
It
It's-
is.
and not only that, you're applying to be an alternate to something that you may or may not be involved with, which makes it even more challenging, right? Or you're applying and may be appointed to be an alternate. So it's statutory language. It's, I think you adopt the shall language, which is just fine. The city makes an effort to
It is
appoint.
what it is, right?
Yeah.
We have
I
to.
think we do have to, and, I mean, again,
Yes.
hopefully, this will become, that there'll be more people that are interested. I understand probably all of the council members should take it upon ourselves to help recruit and find people for the various positions that you fill each year. I know there are methods that you do advertise openings, to solicit people, but we could.
No, I was going to say the same thing, that it's really important to reach out to the rest of the council and say, can't find people to fill this. Can you help us find people?
Sure. Can we find someone?
And as long as we're talking about the committee appointments, maybe it's a good time to get clarity, because I've heard from community members who, again, this has nothing to do with people that serve on that board, but we have a member who doesn't live in the city limits. I understand they operate a business, they don't own a building, but they do own a business and they serve on that committee. So just, it'd be nice to have clarity if that's our standard. So they can operate a business, own property, or live in Hudson. Is that kind of our standard?
For any committee, are you saying?
That's what I'm
Just in
wondering.
general?
Yep, or do they have to be Hudson residents? Because I'm not sure that we're consistent on that.
We did some legal review on that a year or so ago, or 2 years ago.
We did. Yeah, there are only certain areas of the law that require, and of your ordinance, from what I remember when we did that review, that require city residents. So it's more of a policy matter, and the general policy that the council decides to adopt in terms of who may fill those seats.
Exactly, so I'm just looking for clarification. So it sounds like what we can recruit for, if I'm understanding correctly, is Hudson residents, business owners, or property owners. Seems like that's what we use.
Unless specified specifically in the ordinance. So I want to say there are a few of our committees that it's very clear that you have to be, like Downtown Parking Utility Commission, for example. 3 downtown business owners, a representative from the chamber, a council liaison who has to be the downtown representative, that's very prescriptive
Right.
in terms of, who can and cannot be on it. But our others, or if there's something statutory for like plan commission, we have standing committees, like we don't have to necessarily have public works or parks or urban forestry or any of those other committees, right? We could have a committee of the whole council. We could have a number of other ways of approaching things. But unless otherwise specified in the ordinance, whether it has to be a resident or a business owner, property owner, whatever, from what I remember is it's open.
Okay.
So, and just for what's happening, the practice that I've been following is the practice that was relayed to me when I first came on. So, I mean, nothing in that respect has changed. It's been the same.
I appreciate the clarification.
Okay?
Thank you. Well, so the next items, we just talked about that. Since it is in state statute, we probably do need to put that in, as long as alternate members. The ex parte communication, you made a great summary of that, Mike. Part of it is that, picture your role as a judge. If you sit on this zoning board, you are acting like a judge. So you're not going to chat over the water cooler, after a library board meeting or downtown at church or something like that with someone about a court case. So these are like a court case, and so people should avoid that. I do think the guidance, it is not state law, but it is best practice. And I do think we should base our ongoing support for this board on state law, case law, and best practices of, what are the things that are being done in the state that help make sure that the best possible decisions are being made and to protect, the board and the city of Hudson from, having court challenges over their decisions. So the ex parte, the way I chose to word it was that it is not allowed, it is, prohibited, but we could also word it that it is strictly discouraged, and if it takes place, you need to reveal it publicly at the meeting. Now, you mentioned reveal it and recuse yourself, or maybe ask for an alternate to sit in, but, because sometimes it can be inadvertent. Something happens, the neighbor talks to you over the back fence, about the fence, or, something else, and you realize, I shouldn't have been in this discussion, and you're telling, that board member might say, sorry, I can't discuss that, we're having a meeting this week. It is a case before, but if they revealed, someone approached me and I heard a comment, but I didn't give any other feedback, would they have to step away that's kind of a decision for the chair and the legal counsel, I would guess, in those cases. So, but I do think it's important to list it in our ordinance, that it is strongly discouraged. So, and any comments or thoughts on that?
Can I just ask why we're going through this exercise? Did something happen besides the obvious with the courts? I've sat on this board and I'm trying to understand why the tutorial in this appeals zoning board.
I don't mean it to be condescending, sorry. If I am being that way, please speak up.
No, I'm just asking why.
Because there was ex parte communication on that recent case that you're referring to. Pretty flagrant, in my opinion. I can share that publicly or at another time. I think it needs to be, I would like our code to reflect the standards that we're hoping the Board of Appeals operates under.
Okay.
So, sorry, I don't mean to be condescending or having a tutorial at all. So you guys can read the rest. Other comments? As far as the training, you know, I was asked, because I'm on the Finance Committee, the mayor asked me to sit on the Board of Review that meets every May, where people who have a concern about their property taxes have the right to come before the city and make their case about why they think they're charged too much. You know, there's a change in their tax that they're objecting to. In order to participate in that, the first time I came on that committee, I had to take 1.5 hour to 2 hour training, and then I had to notarize and sign a document in front of our clerk stating that I had taken the training. So, you know, it isn't out of the ordinary for, you know, for these really difficult, more legally binding decisions and I look at it as support for the people to understand and help them develop their decision-making. Because as each person makes a decision, voting yes or no on a variance, really it is best practice for them to write down why they denied this variance. I don't believe there is a hardship in this case, or I don't believe there's unnecessary circumstances, whatever it might be. And the more training that people have, the more comfortable they are at knowing that. So that is why I included that. And again,
You're right, the Board of Review operates a lot like the Board of Appeals in that, you know, no ex parte communications because it's a semi-judicial or quasi-judicial committee.
right.
And to add,
Yeah.
these groups don't meet that frequently. It's hard for them because they just don't, I mean, there's years that go by that we might not have a single meeting, and there's ones that we might have 3, 4, 5. They aren't frequent enough, so it's nice to brush up on, you know, or at least having those reminders. So it just makes sense. It's a good practice.
Again, thank you. Best practices is what I was thinking there. And then I did make some comments about the quorum, et cetera. I'll just let other council members to comment. I don't have to walk through all of it. I did have a few that I wanted to comment on.
Okay, so the state law was changed from 4 member, you had to have a vote of, a yes vote from 4 members in order to pass something to now 3 members to pass something. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there was, you'll recall, and this all comes out of our sort of post Second Street development analysis, just in terms of what the required threshold is. And the threshold was, the state changed the threshold to a majority of the quorum, right? And so the city's language is still old and requires the affirmative vote of 4, even though 4 may not be the majority of a quorum. It may be higher than that. So I think the intent of the changes here are to say that a quorum shall be 4, and then later in the body of the changes, it indicates that approval may be made by a majority of 4, which would be 3, so which would be more consistent. So this is really sort of, I think the intent is to create a floor for the quorum number so that the quorum can never drop to 3, because on a board of 5, theoretically, a quorum could drop to 3, and then your approval could be 2. And I think, and I'm not going to speak for Councilmember Knutson, but I think the intent was set that quorum at 4, no less than 4, And then that would allow for a vote of 3 affirmative votes to pass or approve a variance as opposed to the potential for 2. So, but consistent with state law and the revisions to state law.
And to clarify those sections in 255, we have to go through Plan Commission for process standpoint, set a public hearing date. There's that wiffle ball that we play, or whatever you want to call it, where there's a back and forth. That hopefully Josh and everybody at Cedar Corp will be able to make that a little bit more streamlined so we can make it more clear, but there'll be a little ping pong that goes back and forth, because there'll have to be a request to set a public hearing here, and then, so we're just asking to kind of move forward with that. At least staff, that would be kind of, if that's the directive, we would move forward with going down that process with, requesting the council set a public hearing, or having the Plan Commission request that the council set a public hearing date. The council set a public hearing date. Have Plan Commission review the ordinance changes in 255, and then come back to have the public hearing here at council and consider approval of the final ordinance.
So are you saying we have time to think all this through, that we could, or do you want the council to vote and discuss? There's a lot of points here and a lot of issues. So I don't know if the council is prepared to vote today. Are you saying we could ping it to Plan Commission and let them start looking at it?
Plan Commission has to, in our code, Plan Commission is required to look at.
So we don't have to vote or approve it first?
No, I'm just looking,
Sure.
staff is looking for direction, so
Sure.
once we embark on that lovely process, we can go ahead and just get after it.
Well, I'm going to make 2 more comments that are maybe somewhat unique. I was suggesting, I do feel that we have a lot of things that come before a Plan Commission here, and I feel that there should be some separation between the legal counsel before the 2 bodies. So our city attorney advises the Plan Commission, and I was recommending that we hire the services of another attorney to be the advisor. So that is one of the points in here as well, that we would have a separate legal firm or attorney be the advisor and could assist in this training process as well to the Board of Appeals. And so that is an item here that is open for your consideration, and the Plan Commission as well. One more thing I did want to say, it was one of the last things on page 234, is item H, uniqueness of property. And Mr. Vivian has provided some alternate language there, which I do not object to, but I would prefer that those are both included, because the verbiage that I used about the uniqueness of property, if you, at the handout, yes, I was a school teacher once, so I always have handouts, sorry guys. Second page, uniqueness of the property, that verbiage about the where hardship imposed upon an applicant's property, etc., comes from actual court case. So again, we have case law here. That verbiage came from some of the training materials at UW-Stevens Point. So I feel like that is particularly pertinent to us in Hudson, where so many homes and businesses are on a hillside or near the river, things like that. Considerations can, certainly we see that in downtown, what side of 2nd Street you are on depends, greatly affects what you can do with your property. But every property that's on the west side of 2nd Street on the Riverway side, many of them are on a slope, many of them are on the Riverway. And so I feel that this is particularly important to Hudson, stating that we can't recognize a hardship for one property when all the adjacent properties are dealing with the same issue. So it's not a unique hardship for that one piece of property, because their neighbors have a slope, and so does that one down the street. And so that doesn't qualify. So I think that's important verbiage for us here in Hudson. So I, again, certainly appreciate the legal input from Mr. Vivian. So perhaps we could combine those, the verbiage on those.
That was sub H?
Yes, sure. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's me. I will let you guys talk.
Why separate legal counsel?
I think it's important because in the Plan Commission, the attorney works with the process there, and this is a fresh perspective. With these applicants to the Board of Zoning Appeals are asking to do something that's outside of the zoning which is established by the Plan Commission and verified. You know, we vote on the zoning. So I think it's important to have that separation.
Or if the council wanted to challenge a decision made by the Board of Appeals through circuit court, that could potentially create a conflict where, you know, Nick, represents the city as city attorney, you know, then if there's litigation, then it's, and Nick
But it
will have
wouldn't be the
to.
city versus the planning, it would be.
It'd be
the
city
citizen.
versus, no, it'd be city versus the Board of Appeals.
Yeah.
It's a Board of Appeals, yeah.
Yep. So the council would, God forbid, I've not had to be a part of one, I don't know if you've been.
It wouldn't be
Yeah,
pretty.
well, what happens there is the council assigns a new attorney or an attorney for the Board of Appeals.
Right.
And it goes from there.
Yeah, and I differ on this one slightly from Mike. I mean, we have a good example right now that sits before the Board of Appeals that I've not been involved with until the Board of Appeals wanted additional information. And it's involving, you know, a property that's made up of different lots, and the question is, well, how does the city code apply to it? Well, there's a significant interplay between what happens at the Board of Appeals and the city code. And so I think it would be inefficient if, first of all, if the Board of Appeals was required to have legal counsel present at every meeting. Certainly, they don't request legal counsel at every meeting, and there are lots of issues that they decide on their own. And then, you know, secondarily, it's the number of times that I've been involved in working with them versus the number of applications that they have, I think has been fairly minimal, you know, only if they want additional information as to how city code applies. And I agree with the comment. I start with the premise that the answer is no on a variance. A variance is a deviation from city code, and applicants have to come in. They bear the burden of proving that they meet all of the requirements from a hardship perspective. So I understand the potential for a conflict, and I noted in other governmental structures, like at the county where you do have a Board of Adjustments, you know, oftentimes the Board of Adjustments is in conflict with the county board, and so they do get separate counsel when necessary. I think it's fine to indicate that the Board of Appeals shall retain separate counsel when necessary or when the potential for a conflict arises. But I don't know that it's practical or efficient in every case at the city level to require that. So I raise that for policy consideration. You know, I think we can use some common sense and work through that process and make sure that there aren't conflicts. And that if there are, then anytime there is a conflict, we bow out. And that's the exception to the rule as opposed to creating a rule which requires somebody to be inserted or engaged each time there's a need. So it's kind of the way I look at it, but ultimately you guys set the policy and certainly have the authority to determine how you want to work through that process.
Yeah, so I have a question about the one word shall retain. And I don't know if you can comment on that, but it almost doesn't matter what the subject is. It sounds to me that there'll be a retainer paid, a law firm learning all of our codes and our hills and our issues we had in the past. So this is an ongoing expense that we'll start and commit to. I have no idea what that looks like. Are we saying it sounds like a good idea and then not caring about the cost? And I'm not sure where the threshold would be what I'm getting from you is that if needed, that can always be an option. You need to bring in for this specific property or the specific issue. Mm-hmm. But Joy, I guess I'm asking clarification from you. Are you asking that bring on someone, a firm or an individual attorney
Just
on
hire
board?
someone, just like we have a labor attorney. We have a labor attorney for, you know, certain, when HR issues get more interesting, so to speak, or other areas. So I don't think, I mean, the individual would need to study the case and be aware of it and then be prepared to guide the board members appropriately.
We've used a separate attorney, I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
We've used a separate attorney on an instance in another development where there was a conflict and, you know, Nick said, I can't do this one. So We have another attorney that, you know, that we used on that specific case. You know, you reference some of the labor stuff, you know, whether it be negotiations with PD or any of those things. Utilities, we use a separate attorney for.
But they're not on a retainer, correct?
No.
They're-
And
So it
maybe
would
we
be on an
clarify.
The
as-needed
wording,
basis.
the
We
wording
can
could be different
clarify
there.
that
yeah.
language. That's a good point, Lynn.
That,
I
that
think.
is a good point,
Yeah,
right.
drill
It
down
wouldn't
into it, we can-
necessarily be an ongoing expense, but as needed expense.
Yes,
If needed, yeah.
as needed.
But ultimately, not opposed to that, because I feel like there's a blank check coming
That's
No,
what-
and I think ultimately too, is if somebody's requesting something, we require a deposit from the applicant
Right.
to pay for there's an estimate that gets created, right? So it's gonna cost $5,000 to review this case. You're gonna give us a check to pay for our review. Our attorney does not work for the applicant. Our attorney works for the Board of Appeals or the council or, you know.
So there's a fee that
So
helps
there's a
cover.
fee, so they pay, just like any development, right? You pay to play.
Yep.
You know, and the reality is, it's the attorney's job to say, okay, here's the case, here are the facts. Board of Appeals, you know, now you have what you need to, you know, make a fair and honest consideration of the matter before you.
Yeah, and 2 points on that. The example that I referenced that's currently before the Board of Appeals, that scenario with the deposit is exactly what's playing out. The applicant made application, the Board of Appeals had questions, staff reached out to us and we said, well, you know, we would require the applicant to provide a deposit of X number of dollars for us to research the issue. We're researching the issue on behalf of the city. But the only reason that we would get involved in that circumstance is because the applicant has agreed to reimburse the city for its costs. Otherwise, it is the applicant's responsibility to submit a completed application. And if they need to go out and hire their own real estate attorney to figure out what they have in their property, that's their responsibility. The other thing I would say is the only other one, you know, that I can think of is the Second Street development that I got involved in because it was complex, right? And so the board needed assistance in working through that process, helping to take testimony, helping to go through the factors, you know, and frankly, either side at the end of the day could have and probably would have litigated that one based on the outcome. So the Board of Appeals saw that coming and asked that they have representation. That could have been me, or we could have hired that out and engaged somebody else. But otherwise, as the city attorney, I don't have an ongoing role to attend Board of Appeals meetings. It's not, you know, I don't have an ongoing role to attend Plan Commission meetings. Frankly, if the Plan Commission has an issue like the car wash issue or some others where Plan Commission would like me to be there to help provide guidance or background or whatnot, you know, then I'm asked by staff to attend. But so if there's something coming down the pipe that either is highly controversial, where the Board of Appeals, it would be beneficial to the city to have separate counsel for the Board of Appeals, or there's a conflict or there's a potential for litigation. You know, certainly I think we review those in the future on a case-by-case basis and make the best decision we can on behalf of the city.
And of course, as we go through the process, we'll get multiple kicks at the can just because of the process. So we'll work on wordsmithing it and bringing it to the Plan Commission, and then we'll go from there, if that makes sense.
So just getting input and comments tonight is adequate. Thank you for the time and the discussion.
Set the hearing.
Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay.
The hearing will be here.
Anybody, any other comments?
So do you need a motion for anything?
Nope. I think
Okay.
they have direction of
So
us.
we're going to wait to set a hearing date until after the plan
Until the
commission?
Plan Commission requests that you set a public hearing date.
Okay.
They get to hash it out.
All right,
Didn't cross off my.
I don't have anything. So the motion on would be on item C.
I would just table that for now.
Just table it? Well, it's still, well, I can table it, I guess, right? Or do we-
Postpone it.
Sure, just postpone it, and
Wherever you-
ultimately, that language will fold into
Yeah,
whatever.
it's
Once it goes
included.
back to the
I
plan
think it's
commission,
all
but it's,
included.
but we did have that on here to take it up
Yes,
after we
whatever
discussed
your
that.
protocol.
All right, I don't have anything, anybody? Nope.
To adjourn?
Second?
Motion is second to adjourn, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.